So I'll show you some of that. Okay, so I'll shift to this and show like. So I call it the struggle against displacement, because people are displaced from their livelihood. So in India, all of us call it as displacement and movements against displacement. And as people have struggled against this displacement, the Indian state has opened up a real war on the people. I do not know how many of you are aware that there's nearly a sort of civil war-like situation in India, which is tied very closely to the US war against terrorism. Okay. There are organizations in India which are actually involved in this people's movement, which have been classified as terrorist organizations. Okay, and they are being, and the people who are involved in these movements in various ways are being targeted for this by the Indian government in a nearly an open war, which is fought by using everything from unmanned aerial vehicles, like drones, that sort of, which doesn't bomb but which does surveillance, to US anti-insurgency experts going to India and giving advice to the government on these issues. So these things are all happening in India. So this is, so these are all the places where there are all the struggles against this SEZ. So this is sort of superimposed on the map which I just showed, which shows all the special economic zones, and it shows that all these places where there have been struggle against this SEZ. So all these are the flashpoints, and these flashpoints are present all over the country. So I come from this state over here, which has seen some of these major struggles over there. Then there is another state over here on the coast, okay, where there's multiple struggles in which I am involved. So there is this anti-POSCO movement. So here there is a large Korean multinational company. It's called POSCO, which is a steel manufacturing giant, in which we just came to know last year that Warren Buffett was the largest shareholder apparently. Okay, so they were given.
Oh, he's not one of the good guys.
Yeah, I guess so. So they were given 4,000 hectares of land over there, and on this land 50,000 people were dependent on the livelihood, and they were given a part of the coastline to set up their own private port. Okay, and so the people over there have been resisting this for the last 5 years or so. Okay, so this is a sort of struggle which has been going on. Then in this parts, okay, on the coast again, they are trying to set up regions which are called as PCPIRs. These are petrochemical and chemical processing and investment regions. So these are again like enclaves where like industries which are too hazardous to set up in the USA because of environmental regulations are set up. So these are industries like chemical industries, petrochemical industries, ship breaking industries. All the ships which carry a lot of toxic goods during the life, after the end of the lifetime, they have to be sort of broken apart. It's a very toxic business. Then there is sort of waste segregation industry. All the waste that is produced, that is finally segregated by people, and then that is again used for some commercial purpose. So there are people actually who use their hands, mostly women, to actually segregate the waste. So this sort of industries are being set up along the coastline. Ships carrying waste from all over the world go and converge. They download the waste, and then there are women who are actually segregating that waste by their hands. And huge amounts of land are being transferred to these areas to set up this sort of industries. So this sort of places are where this thing is happening. But in this part, which you see in the sort of the central part, you'll see that there are not many of this special economic zones. But this is the part which is the forested part of India also, and this is the part where all, as I was saying, the indigenous people are located. So this is a very lucrative area. But because there is this strong movement which is going in this entire area, therefore it is not really a very attractive area for setting up the special economic zones. So wherever people are struggling, people are resisting these things, the corporations are sort of moving backwards. So what we understand is that this people's resistance, people's movement is important to sort of check this. And and it is called as the so this is a committee of the government. The Indian government was appointed to look at the conditions of the indigenous people, and they called this sort of transfer of lands to these corporations the biggest grab of tribal lands after Columbus. Okay, this was in the draft report, but when the final report was published, we saw that this part had been expunged. But a few of us had actually, a draft report was leaked from the ministry, and we had copies of the draft report. So there we found that the government, the committee itself had said it was the biggest grab of tribal lands after Columbus. And this was what I was showing, the special economic zone. And this entire area where the struggle is going on is today called as a Red Corridor, because there is this people's movement which is led by a communist party which is going on over there, which is called as the Red Corridor, therefore. And this is one such place, example of land grabbing. This is in a place from the state where I come, in a place called Shalboni, where 3,000 hectares of land was handed over to a company again to set up a steel plant. And what was there? So these are again pictures which I guess nobody has seen. I was there on at the time when this was happening. So this land, it had like half of it was forest land, and very rich forest land. So this forest land, and it is under the environmental regulation that forest land cannot be used for these purposes. So within 2 days, the entire forest was uprooted. So what you see behind this entire land was basically a forest. So now the trees were just uprooted and removed, okay? And the rest of the land, basically the company bought from the local farmers, and 50% of the money they paid in cash, and 50% of the money they said that the people over there would get shares in the company when the company comes up. And the people over there don't even know what a share is, okay? And then they built a wall around this, okay, in this entire land. So this entire land was an agricultural land. When I was there, this was the last crop. This is the paddy crop, the rice crop, which people were growing over there. So this they have completely walled around. Okay, so there's a 16-kilometer long wall around this place, and there are like 10,000 people who were dependent on this land for their livelihoods, have nothing to live on now. Okay, and the wall has been built in such a way that it has cut off the access to 5 of these tribal villages, and the kids from the villages who have to go to school now have to take a detour of like 3 miles. So they walk 3 miles across a railway track to be able to reach their schools, because the actual road accessing the villages have been cut off. Okay, so this is a sort of thing, and against this, and against this repression of the government, which is the war, people rose up. And I by chance was there while this war was going. And when people actually come out seeking their rights, seeking their livelihoods, the police is sent to beat them up, kill them, and these are from news reports which came out from this area. Especially women are targeted, because once they target women, the entire will of the community is affected. Okay, so this sort of struggles are going on. And so this is what all these things. So the people's committee against atrocity, and so the tribals now came out into the open with the traditional weapons, bows and arrows, and actually challenged the might of the Indian state in this way. So there were police forces, but against this were all these tribals, and mostly like women. There was this huge assemblies of women and people, which was like a general assembly which was meeting together and taking decisions. Okay, so I was part of some of these meetings, and it was a wonderful experience to see that there are all these people, women, housewives, who had come out for the first time in their lives, and they were sitting in these public meetings and taking decisions. Okay, they were taking decisions about how to run their lives, about what development is means for them, how they would want to have control over their livelihoods, etc. So this happened, and these are like this huge assemblies of people which was happening. This was their like the charter of demands, etc. and this was the like the sort of meetings which were being attended by people. In the cities, people came out in solidarity with this, and that is, as I was saying, that this connection of solidarity movements in the cities with the people's movements is very important. And so this sort of movements are going on all over the country, empowering women, empowering poor people, but there is this huge amount of state repression which is tied with this worldwide, what is said, the war on terrorism, and there is also the understanding that these struggles are somehow connected with the struggles happening in other parts of the world. The struggles which have been happening in Europe against the austerity measures, against the unemployment which has been going on, and for example the struggles which have taken place in the US in terms of the Occupy movement, in terms of the the attack on people's lives and livelihoods which have been taking place over here. And people in India, all these people who are struggling for their lives and livelihoods are interested in this, in what is happening over here. And what we think is that there has to be sort of understanding between people across the world who are sort of confronting the might of the corporations in this way, because without that it is very easy to sort of pose the people of one country against the people of others. Means you can easily say that the Indian workforce, because jobs are being shifted to India or China from the US, that the Indian workforce or the working class is against the US working class. In that way you can play them one against the other. But actually the interests of the working people all over the world is same, because as I just said, what the corporations are doing are affecting the interests of both the American and the Indian working people, and these poor people whose lives and livelihoods are under attack. So I think there has to be more discussion, more sort of coordinated actions in a way that this can be confronted. Therefore, an organization like Sanhati, which we have tried to build this sort of networks. We have networks all over India in all these movements, and we also have friends over here who are sort of involved in local organizing and also in this in organizing in India. So that is the sort of thing which is important, I think. So this all shows these movements. There are all these cultural activities in the movement. So there are these people's cultural troops which have been created, which actually perform in this huge meetings. So these are absolutely forested areas where these meetings take place. And then there are meetings in the cities which happens over there. So this is a sort of health center which was started off. So in many such areas there are no health services by the government. So then the people have got together to start their own health services, okay, which is free. And there are volunteer doctors who go and work in this in these places, and the local people are trained in medical and paramedical activities. And this sort of people's health initiatives have taken place. They have done other sorts of local developmental work, which addresses the requirements of the people, doesn't address the requirements of big corporations, etc. But against this, these are the Indian military which has been sent. So these are all these big rallies, and against this are this Indian the Indian military forces. And then there are confrontations like this, where you have the police on one hand and all the women with the traditional weapons on the other hand. And there has been numbers of this firing on these people. Many people have been killed, and there are around just in my state where I come from, there are around 750 people who have been imprisoned. Like this sort of people who have been imprisoned, who are there as political prisoners now, and they are languishing in jail for the last 4 or 5 years. And an anti-terrorism law is being used to accuse all of them of terrorist activities. So this is also a scenario where political prisoners, and all over India there are around like 7,000 political prisoners. Okay, people who have been arrested both from the cities and from the countryside, accused of waging war against the state in this way. But these are just like common people like this who are there to to protect their own lives and livelihoods. So this is the like the armed might of the Indian state, and this is how the sort of repression which takes place. These are like horrible pictures, but you see what goes on in the name of the war on terrorism over here. So you have a question?
I'm not very familiar with Indian politics and such. Are people in your native state allowed to bear arms? Are they allowed to own weapons?
No, not.
This is the kind of stuff that happens when people aren't allowed to have weapons. So everybody buy a gun, right?
No, but people, when they take up weapons, again the state, this is what the state does to them basically. So there are people who have taken up arms.
Doesn't have a Second Amendment, and it's harsh.
Yeah.
But
No, these are people.
The differences.
Yeah.
By AKs in 16s, they're useful to prevent this.
No, these are actually people who have taken up arms. So when they take up arms,
have good enough arms.
This is the sort of response which the Indian state or the state does to them. So these are like, like this little boy when his village was attacked by the police for no reason, basically just to create terror. They like chopped off his fingers in this way. So this is the sort of thing which happens. Yeah.
I mean, I support the Second Amendment, but to contradict what he's saying over here, don't you think that it'd be better off if we had more of a non-violent method implemented in these movements? Like,
these people have already gone to the point of having to fight, and because they had weapons that weren't sufficient, instead of trying honorably resisting, they had their hands cut off and were carried away on sticks.
Right, but in India and in America, it's already been historically proven by Gandhi and Martin Luther King that non-violence is an effective method of resistance.
American television?
And especially against the military-industrial complex, which you noted is tied
right,
to...
yeah. So we'll talk about the question of violence and non-violence. I'll come to that. That is an important issue.
There were so many military actions during the era of Gandhi.
Yeah. So you had a question?
I think the larger question of violence and non-violence you'll come to.
I'll come to,
And so we should address.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that the Second Amendment issue is not an issue for all countries in the same way that it is for the United States. Mm-hmm. There aren't even as many guns in India. Even if you could bear arms, it's not like you go to the local Walmart and get a gun and bullets. It's a completely different scenario.
Yeah,
this place is flooded with guns. That's not true in most other parts of the world.
Which is why we don't have governments showing up and cutting our children's hands off.
Okay, let me just say real fast, if we can be a little bit more democratic about the questions, answer, I mean, if you want to finish up, and then we can move into that sort of...
the sort of a discussion.
Yeah.
So basically what I wanted to bring to you is that, so there is this sort of a worldwide attack on people's lives and livelihoods which is taking place. This is happening because of a collusion between large multinational corporations, local corporations in each country and the governments of these countries. But the hopeful thing is that the people are rising up against it. People are rising up against it in various ways, completely, there's a whole spectrum of resistances against it, okay? Completely non-violent, involving civil disobedience, non-cooperation, to resistances which uses arms. And this sort of has and this is happening in lots of, it's happening in South America, it is happening in India, all these places. And that sort of gives us hope that we need to work together to move together against this attacks on common people's, working people's lives and livelihoods. We will talk about, discuss about the details of this process maybe, but that is where I guess I can sort of end my discussion and my talk, and then we can have a discussion.
Okay. Yeah. With that, I'll just call on folks and just keep it brief, and I think a lot of folks will have questions. So I saw your hand up first, actually.
Sure. So this is an old story. It's happened in cycles pretty much throughout human history, right? Land has continued to be appropriated by a small set, used in some way. I mean, it's the conversion of commons land into private land used for private capitalist or whatever you want to call it, private mercantile purposes, private commercial purposes, happened in waves and in many forms. So what's interesting about this is, like you said, it pointed out, it's happening both at the urban scale and it's happening at the rural scale. It's happening in different ways in those situations, but what you're saying is that the forms of response to these, the forms of resistance to these kinds of appropriations are both grassroots and common across both of these scales of appropriation. I'm curious about what you think, because the some of the words you use, the rhetoric you use the notion of resistance, and you use the notion of opposition as some of the key sort of concepts that are operating in this, right? I mean, the details, of course, matter, and the ways in which all this stuff happens matters. I'm curious about whether you think these, how novel are these forms of resistance in your experience, and seeing that you have seen a really wide variety of this. And secondarily, are these novel forms of resistance, I mean, there's some work been done on this by Elinor Ostrom and so on, working on common property resources and the ways in which they're managed. I'm curious about whether these forms of resistance are actually going to lead to, in your opinion, other newer forms of management that are not about like public or people versus government, but some kind of amalgam in between, and something that gives us a newer vision perhaps of what democracy and a democratically managed use of land looks like. I mean, are we just basically one class versus another, or is this creating a new form of space? Is this creating new structures? Can we?
Okay. So the first question is about the forms of resistance and whether this is novel. Number one is that we should think about the scale. So the scale of resistance, or the scale, firstly the scale of this appropriation which we are seeing now is sort of unprecedented. You know, like the scale at which these things operate over the entire world, where entire countries' resources can be sort of grabbed. You know, like most of the civil wars which are happening in Africa are because of mineral resources which need to be taken from a country. You know, in India also the scale at which this is happening involves like hundreds of millions of people. All right. So the scale of appropriation is something like unprecedented. Therefore, the resistance is also happening at an unprecedented scale, and again in novel ways. For example, I'm coming to this picture. This is a picture from a place where I showed on the coast, where this Korean company is trying to acquire land. So last year in June, they tried to, the police force tried to move in to acquire the land. The people of the area, they took up this novel form of resistance. So people went and just lay down on the land. You can see all these lines of people lying down. In the first line there are children lying down, second line there are women lying down, and then there are the men lying down. So they are lying down on the land in a form of like saying that if you have to take over the land, you have to walk over our bodies and take over the land. So this is the sort of novel forms, and these are people are coming. I was there. There is a sort of advisory committee to this movement over there, and I am a part of this committee. So I was there when this was happening, and when the people took this decision, I didn't believe that it could be done. I didn't believe that it was in the burn. It was in summer. This is sand. Okay, this burning sand, and people just took the decision that we would lie down on the land, and the police have to move over us if they have to take over land. I wouldn't have ever thought about it, you know. And then we devised ways of how this thing can be continued. You know, we devised ways of people would get buckets of seawater and sprinkle on the people to cool them down, etc. So these forms are novel forms of resistance. The struggle which I showed you, where the other struggle, the pictures which I was showing you there, people just what they do, they cut off the approach ways to their villages. They basically dig up the road so that vehicles cannot move into the road, and they sort of create a liberated area. It's an entire area where police vehicles or state vehicles cannot go in. Okay, and then the liberated area is a place which is now run by the people themselves. So this sort of novel forms of resistance are coming up in this way, where people are really challenging in one form the might of the state, and the second form the rationale of the state in doing this. Now your second question is that whether you are asking that whether this can give rise to a more democratic space, where this can be a sort of possibly maybe discussed, and you can come to a sort of middle path. That has been tried. Okay. You know, that has been tried. You know, that's why all these laws about rehabilitation, compensation, all these things come up. Like, you know, like the idea is that if people are evicted from the land, then they will be given some compensation. They would be rehabilitated somewhere else. But what we have seen with our experience over the last 50 years or 60 years of the Indian Republic and in other countries also is that none of these really help people. Okay? you cannot really compensate a person's loss of livelihood. A person who loses a piece of land on which he or she is practicing agriculture, when they're given a certain amount of money, okay, that money just disappears. Because this agriculture is a regular source of income. If these people have a crisis in their family, like for example a hospitalization of someone, okay, then immediately the entire money goes away. So I have seen that in a village, for example, where people have actually taken this compensation, after a year, the only thing what has happened is that 7, shops selling alcohol have come up in the village, because people are just spending the money to get drunk, alright? And then they are migrating out from the village to other places to work as cheap labor. So there is really, it doesn't look like with the way this is planned, it is not planned to actually give rise to a middle path.
Well, I have follow-up questions, but I will.
Yeah, so maybe we can come back to this.
There
was someone was asking a question. Yeah.
I'm sort of
okay, yeah, go ahead then.
Thinking along the same lines, is there some other form of discourse that can come about, during this, instead of just like trying, because like it really seems like a duality here. There's really no gray area in between. That's.
Not really. See, there is a lot of middle ground. I think the basic issue is a question of what development means. Okay,
and also to use. Some people seem to be a little bit up on the Second Amendment thing, and to use a gun is to. I'm not trying to open it up again, but to use a gun is to also engage in that very language that is trying to imperialize you, or I don't know. You know what I mean?
I think it's a very good point. But the simple fact of the matter is, if you're using a gun, you'll at least die instead of having to live a life with no hands.
Let's hear the response.
Yeah, so we'll talk about.
I was just talking about the form.
Yeah.
It's not like they have a chance anyway of like on
the question of.
So like what I'm saying is like the idea, like all of this is happening, but like what sort of discourse or what sort of idea is going to sustain or going to be there after people are dying, like what is coming, what is being bred out of.
No, it's definitely people are not doing this to basically die off and not have nothing left. People are doing this to live, to survive. No one is sort of doing the resistance as a sort of suicide mission. Everyone wants to live. Everyone wants to have a proper life. So a lot of these things are coming up. As I said, when all these struggles are going on, at the same time when people are trying to resist a police force from coming in and sort of evicting them, they're also building institutions. They're building health centers. They're building schools. They are having innovative forms of agriculture which is not dependent on outside inputs. Okay, they are developing novel means of irrigation. So people are in the process of construction also during these times. Okay, they are just telling that we want development on our terms. Development cannot be dictated on terms which we don't even understand, which is nowhere in our discourse. So it is not that these movements are just movements of resistance, they are also movements of construction. And that is a part and parcel of this movement. So that discourse is definitely there. Yeah.